I don't like anything about you, Mother. We want to live alone as a family, so get out. These words hit me out of nowhere, spoken by my eldest son's wife. It felt just like when I had to leave my parents' home alone. Anger boiled up inside me at the thought of being kicked out of this house too. Fine, I'll leave then, I said, and I started packing my things. That was the last straw. I swear I'll never forgive my eldest son's wife. It was time to put my plan into action. My name is Sandra Clark, and I'm turning 61 this year. Technically, I'm retired, but I'm lucky enough to still be working, though I don't go to the office daily. I drop by occasionally and attend meetings. Nowadays, most of those meetings are remote, so I work from home most of the time. But my eldest son seems to think I'm not working anymore. I became a widow in my 40s, and now, I live with my eldest son and his wife. My parents' home is an old house on a big piece of land. It's a bit run down, but I loved it, which made leaving hard. Financially, I've never had any problems. Most of the insurance money from my late husband is still untouched, and I don't have to worry about my future. Even though my life seems easy, I do have concerns. One of the biggest is my son's wife, Jessica. She's strong-willed, and we often clash. This didn't just start recently. It began when she first came to tell me they were getting married. I still remember what she wore when she first introduced herself, a tracksuit, like one you might wear in high school. She said she wanted to meet me without any pretense, but from a normal perspective, it was inappropriate. She's very argumentative and extremely good at it, which makes things difficult. I've often wondered why my son chose her as his wife. Later, I learned that Jessica was the one who approached my son. She might be outrageous, but she is beautiful. I think my sheltered son was charmed by her. Even after they got engaged, she stayed the same. If you're being kind, you could say she's down to earth. If you're being honest, she just doesn't seem to have common sense. I wanted to oppose their marriage, but I told myself it was my son's choice, so I held back. And now, this is where we are. My son didn't want to leave me alone in the family home, so after the wedding, he insisted we live together. At first, I thought Jessica wouldn't want to live with us, but it turned out she was actually in favor of it. Soon after we moved in together, I realized why. Jessica never helped with the housework. She left everything to me: cleaning, laundry, cooking, all of it. And the strange part? She was a full-time housewife. She had quit her job when she got married. Even though I don't go to the office every day, I work from home, so I have less free time than her. While I was busy working on my computer, Jessica would make snide comments, saying I was just playing around. At first, I tried to laugh it off to avoid arguments, but her constant remarks really started to annoy me. One day, I asked her, "Jessica, you seem to have some spare time. Could you help with the cleaning?" She gave me a disgusted look, sighed dramatically, and said, "I don't do housework for your sake. Mother, why don't you understand? It's sad you can't appreciate my thoughtfulness." She then went on to explain her bizarre theory that if she did the housework, I would lose my only job, and that would make me lazy and unhealthy. She even claimed that not doing the housework might help prevent dementia for me. In her mind, she was actually doing me a favor by letting me do all the chores. She added, "I agreed to live together so you wouldn't slack off." Mother, with a half-smile on her face. I was speechless. I regretted the decision to live with them. If I had lived separately, I could have avoided seeing things like this. Now, doing the housework while Jessica watched every day felt like torture. I finally reached my breaking point and decided to talk to my eldest son. I wasn't planning to complain about Jessica, though. Instead, I told him I wanted to move to an apartment where I could live alone. The house we were in was old and had a lot of stairs and uneven floors, which had caused me back pain last year. It just wasn't practical for me anymore. I explained this to my son, and I moved into an apartment. Even though it felt like Jessica had driven me out, I didn't regret leaving. The new place was a rental, and I had picked a space big enough for my grandchildren to stay in the future. I even customized the interior to my taste. It was like having my own little castle. But my happiness didn't last long. Jessica started coming over every day and staying until late at night. "This new apartment is really nice. Isn't it too big for you, Mother?" Jessica said, lounging on my couch. "Come on, Mother, come back to the old house and do the house chores. It's for your health and longevity." I couldn't believe it. Jessica was seriously telling me to go back to the old house to do the chores. She's so self-centered. It makes my head spin. I've already moved out. Jessica, you need to step up as the wife now. I take care of all the chores here, and my health is fine. I get my annual checkups. Jessica just turned her head. ignoring what I said. This was typical of her. She always pretended not to hear anything she didn't want to deal with. Even after this, she kept coming to my apartment every day. The other day, she even said it was too much hassle to go back home, so she stayed the night. My old house and this apartment are only about a 15-minute walk apart. It was my son who suggested I live near my old home because he was worried about me. His concern made me a little sad to leave, but I agreed. One day, after I returned from a rare business outing, I got a shock. Jessica had let herself into my apartment. She must have used the spare key I had given to my son. Welcome back, she said, lying on the floor in front of the TV, not even bothering to get up. Jessica, that spare key is for emergencies, not for you to use when I'm not here, I said, feeling uncomfortable. I had never spoken so firmly to her before. She seemed surprised, since she was used to me letting things go quickly. She gave me an annoyed look, but I didn't back down. You're such a stingy mother-in-law. I can't stand you, she yelled. I can't stand anything about you, even this apartment. We're family, so you should leave. She tried to push me out the front door. It was clear she hated that I had this nice apartment while they were still living in the old house. She even complained that my son, James, was paying the rent for the apartment and said it was unfair that I lived here while they didn't. This is what living beyond your means looks like, she snapped. It turned out Jessica thought my son was paying the rent for my apartment. That explained why she kept showing up. She believed the apartment should belong to her family. Fine, I'll leave, I said, staring her down. I agreed to move out within 3 days. Jessica didn't believe me and insisted I call a moving company in front of her. So, I pulled out my phone and scheduled movers for 2 days later. Satisfied, she left, and I started making my plan. As promised, I moved out. My new home was a senior-friendly apartment, and I decided to test it out for 2 weeks. I handed over the keys and lease documents to Jessica and asked the real estate agent to change the contract to her name. Since I knew the landlord well, they agreed, which was a relief. My eldest son was furious with Jessica for forcing me out. He's even thinking about divorcing her, but Jessica doesn't seem to care. Instead, she started living alone in my old apartment, saying, "Well, let's live separately." I couldn't believe how bold she was, but I knew the truth would come out soon. 5 days later, Jessica found out. My phone rang repeatedly while I was working from home. It was Jessica, and I was ready for this. I had a recorder set up and hit record before answering. "Mother, what's going on with the rent for this apartment? Why am I the one paying it? This isn't fair." Jessica was furious and clearly panicking. "Oh, but Jessica, aren't you the leaseholder now? It's only right that you pay the rent. Is there a problem?" I asked calmly, making her even more agitated. Jessica was confused. "But didn't James used to pay the rent? We're not even divorced yet, so shouldn't James still be paying?" When Jessica brought up the rent with my son, he told her that I knew the whole truth. The reality was, James had never paid the rent for that apartment. In fact, I had been helping him financially. After I retired, I stayed on as a consultant at my company and worked as an industry advisor, making a good income. With my experience, I earned far more than my son ever did. I had been secretly helping my son financially because he was struggling due to Jessica's extravagant spending. "So you misunderstood, Jessica," I said. "I was the one paying the rent for that apartment. James didn't pay a cent." Jessica, who had hoped to live separately in the new apartment, was clearly shocked. She didn't say much before hanging up the phone. I immediately called my son and let him listen to the recorded conversation. "I've been putting up with it for a while too, but I'm at my limit. You feel the same, right?" I knew my son was exhausted from paying off the debts Jessica had piled up, no matter how old he was. As his mother, I couldn't help but step in. Even if people think I'm being too soft, I believe it's a natural thing for a parent to do. In a quiet voice, my son said, "I'm going to divorce her. I'm tired too." "Well, follow my plan then," I told him, laying out the steps. I asked him to take a few days of paid leave and to start moving out his important belongings without Jessica noticing. He had to be discreet so that she wouldn't see any moving trucks or suspect anything. We decided to move his things out gradually, at night, to a location Jessica didn't know about, a house I had found for him as a new place to live. Everything went smoothly. 3 days later, Jessica called me again, even more flustered than before. "What's got you so worked up now?" I asked, speaking to her calmly. Just like before, Jessica was panicking. "Mother, our house is up for sale, and my parents just called. saying my belongings arrived at their house. What does this mean? Following my instructions, my son had moved out and sent Jessica's things to her parents' home. The house she was living in had been emptied and put up for sale. The landlord told me if I can't pay the rent, I need to leave. I tried to talk to James, but when I got home, the gate was padlocked, and there's even a for sale sign up. I can't get in. Jessica was nearly hysterical. She must have been shocked when she saw the house locked up. I've already signed a contract with the realtor. You can't go back to that house anymore, I said calmly, and there are a few things I want to clear up now. First, I reminded her, I'm no longer your mother-in-law, right? Yesterday, James filed for divorce. You signed the papers, didn't you? So now, you and I are just strangers. My son had finally filed the divorce papers Jessica had signed long ago. She used to threaten him with divorce to get her way, and he had always hoped she would change. But he had finally realized it was time to move on, and he submitted the papers. The divorce is official now, Jessica. You always told James you could divorce anytime. Aren't you happy now that things have gone your way? On the other end of the phone, I could sense Jessica holding her breath, realizing how things had turned out. Jessica wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words. She was clearly frustrated. Besides, after the divorce, how are you going to live in that apartment without working? Moving costs money too. It's not easy, I said. How did you even manage to pay the rent? Jessica couldn't hide her anger anymore. She yelled and cursed at me, admitting that she married my son because of the inheritance my late husband left. However, since I controlled the inheritance, she couldn't access any of it. She screamed that nothing was going right, even though she married my son to help pay off her debts. Of course, I let my son hear this conversation, as I was planning to use the recording as evidence for the divorce settlement. Jessica ranted for about 15 minutes, but I stayed calm and waited for her to finish. Then, she broke down and begged for help. I've been disowned by my family. I have nowhere to go. Please help me, she cried. She admitted that her parents had cut her off because of her spending and borrowing habits. I felt a little sorry for her, but I knew this was the result of her own choices. Apologizing now won't change anything. We're no longer family. There's nothing more to say. Good luck with your life, I told her before ending the call. After that, I felt a huge sense of relief. Later, my son told me that Jessica had caused a scene at his workplace, to the point where the police had to be called. While she was out, the landlord changed the locks on her apartment because she hadn't paid rent. She couldn't get back in. She probably tried to call me or my son, but we had changed our phone numbers and she had no way of contacting us. We also didn't tell her where we moved, so she couldn't find us. After the incident at my son's job, she was given a restraining order. With nowhere else to go, she went back to her family's home, but they refused to let her inside. Her luggage, which I had sent to her parents' house, was left outside in the rain. She wasn't even allowed to step foot in the house. On top of that, her parents received a bill for the unpaid rent, which likely made them even angrier. I heard she is now staying in an apartment provided by an organization that helps homeless people. When I saw her on the street one day, she looked completely different. Her hair had turned white, her skin looked dry, and she seemed stressed. I barely recognized her. It was shocking to see how much her life had changed. As for me, I've started a new chapter in my life. I used my late husband's inheritance to buy a new house, a duplex, so that my son can remarry whenever he's ready. He still joins me for dinner, but otherwise, he takes care of his own things. I've realized this is the perfect amount of distance for both of us. The money from selling my parents' house is saved for my son's future and possibly for his future wife and kids. I'm also thinking about setting up the English garden I've always wanted at my new home. On my days off, I work in the garden, taking care of the plants. This new routine has brought me peace and hope for the future.